In this next episode of our Getting to Know Jesus series, we walk the route Jesus would have walked when he observed the biblical feasts in Jerusalem, right here in his homeland. In our Western culture today, we often imagine Jesus connected to Easter and Christmas more than any other holidays. But have you ever stopped to ask what holidays Jesus actually celebrated when he lived here? To learn a bit more about the holidays Jesus himself would have observed, I met up with tour guide Richard Frieden in Jerusalem, and we headed closer to the original Jerusalem, the city of David, to trace the path of first-century Jewish pilgrims who obeyed God's command to visit the temple in Jerusalem for appointed holidays every year. And according to the New Testament, Jesus and his earliest followers were among these faithful Jewish pilgrims.
So good to be with you this morning and just, once again visiting the city of David.
I love coming here.
Genesis of Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Great.
This place is amazing.
As we walked along toward the Kidron Valley, the view was breathtaking. We made our way to an important stop that masses of Jewish pilgrims would make just prior to their ascent to the temple, the Pool of Siloam.
So it's the high holiday season. It's the three major pilgrimage feasts.
Right.
And we would be journeying from our home in the upper portion of the city, and we are excited.
Yeah.
In this moment, we are going to be doing something here at the Pool of Siloam. This is actually 3/4 acres of a pool that's discovered back in 2004
Right.
by Israeli archaeologists Eli Shukran and Ronnie Reich. And it's exciting to be here in what is known as the Pool of Siloam, the Pool of Shiloh. So if we roll back the time, 2,000 years ago, beautifully colonnaded pool that Herod the Great builds or rebuilds, kind of gives a facelift to an earlier version of the Pool of Siloam. And the pilgrims are here to prepare themselves for what? Pilgrimage. We have three main pilgrimage feasts, and prior to every feast, they're going to be doing what's known as an immersion ritual. They'll be stepping down into these waters, really literally going down into these waters, and they would be immersing themselves.
Okay.
And this is an act of preparing, going from like the profane to the holy, or to prepare one's heart. So they're ritually pure according to the law of Moses. To do the work, or to do the service, or to worship a holy God. And that is done on Mount Moriah. That's done on the Temple Mount.
Which is just up here.
In this direction.
Yeah, and for people who are watching and learning here, Jesus, we know, went to the feast with his parents as a boy.
That's right.
We know he came to the temple on various occasions as an adult during his ministry. We even know about a very famous miracle that happened right here.
In the chapter 9 of the book of John, we know that Jesus is here with his disciples, and he heals a blind person. And there's all kinds of discussion about the blind person.
Not just a blind person.
Not just a blind person.
Somebody that was
blind from birth.
Yes.
So this adds another dimension to it, and of course can raise all kinds of questions in the day. There's another beautiful moment here, because if we're talking about the Feast of Tabernacles, and the pilgrims have prepared themselves, and Jesus is in the city during the this particular Feast of Tabernacles.
Right.
Then there are the elements of water, as we talked about, the immersion ritual in water. And that's very powerful because of the fact that water is a source of life.
Right.
And we have living waters here. It has to be pure living waters in order for one to go down in the mikveh, and to be immersed, this is one of the uses of the Pool of Siloam. But there's also light. We know that the light, the presence of God, is in the temple, represented by the menorah.
Right.
So it's interesting in the scriptures that Jesus talks about this.
And just, Richard,
Yes.
to sort of pick up on the water theme,
Yes.
so people understand living water. Living water is either something that springs up from the ground,
Right, like at
Or-
Magdala,
or something that falls from the sky.
like rain.
It has to come from God. And so here in this pool,
So it wouldn't be contaminated.
Exactly.
That would be pure living waters.
Yeah.
Exactly. So these would be coming from sources of springs,
right,
just close by to us.
yes,
Gihon Springs.
That's right.
And other springs in the region. And there's something very powerful about water and light, because it's here that Jesus does say in chapter 8 of the book of John, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light which gives life. I mean, he knows that as he's teaching his disciples here.
yes,
And he knows exactly who he's speaking to within the context of our Hebrew and Mosaic mindset.
right,
On the last great day of the feast, as it says, now on the last day of the last great day of the Feast of Tabernacles, Hoshana Rabbah, Yeshua stood, Jesus stood and cried out, if anyone is thirsty, let him come to me and drink. Whoever puts his trust in me, as the scripture says, rivers of living waters will gush up. It's like a gihon, and it would flow from his innermost being.
yeah,
So this was a powerful moment.
yeah. And I love this text because, we're learning about getting to know Jesus, who Jesus really was.
That's right.
And so we're understanding that,
good.
he also would have studied the word in synagogue growing up as a boy. He would have observed all of the Jewish
Yes.
feasts like the ones that we're talking about here at the pool.
That's right.
And when he makes his ascent and stands there outside the temple and
Yes.
says those words, if anyone is thirsty, come to me and drink, and rivers of living water will come. He's actually referring to something that the priests would do on every
That's
single
right.
day of the feast,
That's
right?
right. Every day.
Tell us about what they did. They brought here.
The priests in the temple would come down every morning for what is known as the preparation of the water libation ceremony.
Right.
And they would come down with golden pitchers, like receptacles that you would put the water in, and then would go up to the temple.
Right.
They would encircle the water basin 7 times, and we know that 7 is a very special number. It's about completion and wholeness. And then they would pour it into the silver basin,
Right.
and the pilgrims would cry out, "U shavte mayim bisason mim ma'anei hayeshua." You would draw waters of salvation from those springs
Yes.
of salvation with great joy.
Yes.
You
Amen.
will draw living waters.
Wow.
And that's that's exactly the connection that you're referring to. That Yeshua knows those scriptures, and he's saying, now they're here for you.
Yeah.
If you're thirsty, drink. This is the moment to do it.
Amen.
It's amazing. I love it. But here we are walking along the bleachers of the Pool of Siloam.
So very likely,
Used for all kinds of water purposes, including the spiritual immersion, the mikveh.
and very likely Jesus and his disciples walked on some of these
Absolutely.
stones.
This is
Okay.
a column, 2,000-year-old column that's found in situ in its original place, and archaeologists made that decision to leave it here so we can see the evidence of the beautiful colonnaded Pool of Siloam,
Right.
2,000 years old. And from this point, the pilgrims are going to be going up and journeying along that pilgrim road.
Can we see that?
We can definitely see that.
Okay.
So we're going up the pilgrim road, and I say up because it is an ascent, and pilgrims would often stop at kiosks like this, that we're seeing, this restored kiosk, and they would purchase items for offerings at the temple or sacrifices.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they could stop and get their goat, or they
That's
could
right.
get their food offering of some kind.
That's exactly correct.
Very good.
Yep. So this is the eastern road along the Tyropian Valley.
This is an amazing reconstruction.
It really is.
I've never seen this before. I've been in here before, but this was not done. So it's incredible to be able to see. So we're going to see the road.
We're going to see the actual road, and in fact, what you see on the right here is a covered drainage channel or water aqueduct here.
Right.
And on the left, we can see actually the steps of the Pilgrim Road.
And this is temple period, 2,000 years old.
2,000 years old. That's correct.
Amazing.
That's correct.
Now the road would have been much wider, yes?
It would have been wider.
Underneath.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Shall we go?
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah. Okay.
Wow. Ascending to the temple.
So it is very much an aliyah.
Come and let us go.
Like we see later on prior to entering a magnificent gate.
Watch your head there.
It is an ascent. It is an aliyah. You're going up to Jerusalem.
Don't go away. When we come back, experts in Israel tell us more about the holidays Jesus observed right here in his homeland. I was a pastor for over 20 years before I first went to Israel, only to realize that I was totally disconnected from the roots of my faith. Since then, I've been on a journey of discovery, and my faith has come alive in ways I never could have imagined. I'm Jeff Euters, Executive Director of First Century Foundations, and I'm excited to invite you to explore the land of the Bible and to discover your part in a Bible story that isn't over yet. First Century Foundations exists to reconnect Christians to the foundations of Christianity. And we do this by creating Bible-based media focused on Israel. But we don't just reconnect you to Israel in the Bible. We help you participate in what God is doing in Israel today by connecting you to over 70 ministries in Israel who desperately need our support. Will you partner with us? Together, we'll explore Israel's biblical past while playing our role in Israel's bright future. It was so incredible to walk in the very footsteps of first century Jewish pilgrims who ascended Mount Zion to observe the feasts of the Lord in Jerusalem. It made me want to learn more, so I asked a few experts in Israel to talk a bit more about the holidays Jesus would have observed when he lived here 2,000 years ago.
There are 5 biblical holidays. And I think that there's a particular listing of them in Leviticus 23. But we have Passover, which is the first holiday we really become familiar with in the Bible because that begins with the Exodus. So we already have that this is going to be a holiday to commemorate the Exodus, and that's Passover. Later on we get the details. It's going to be 7 days, and you know exactly what you do, and you don't eat any unleavened bread, and you have matzah, and that is very much set forth in the Bible, as well as there was a sacrifice, the Passover sacrifice. It was a lamb, a sacrifice that was brought at the very beginning of Passover.
There are 3 holidays in the Jewish calendar in which the Israelites were commanded to go up to the temple in Jerusalem and present a sacrifice of some type or another. The first was Passover, which happens in the springtime, around the lambing season, the time when the lambs are born, and you take 1-year-old lambs and you bring them up as an offering. That is a week-long celebration. So families who come on pilgrimage would head down or head from whatever part of the country they are, and then they would go up to Jerusalem. And we can imagine that Although our city today is walled, the walled city was slightly bigger in the time of Jesus than the walled city is today. But also we can picture people camping on the Mount of Olives, spending the night out under the stars, because Jerusalem would fill up with tourists. When Jesus has his Last Supper, he hires a room in which he can gather his disciples to have that meal. He doesn't live in Jerusalem, but there are all kinds of people who would let out rooms and who might have, in Jerusalem, you could even have a tavern or an inn and have a space that would be big enough to host a group. So Jerusalem in those days would be very, very busy and exciting.
Jesus followed the Torah just like all Jews in his time. Some were a little bit more knowledgeable, and so they knew a little bit better. And you can't blame somebody for not doing something right if they never read the manual. But Jesus certainly read the manual of the holidays of Passover and of Shavuot, which was the book of the Pentecost. Imagine that. The Pentecost means 50, and it's 50 days after Passover. So even though Pentecost nowadays sounds like something Christian, it really is a very Jewish holiday. In fact, Pentecost means 50 days. It's named in the Bible the holiday of weeks, Shavuot. 7 weeks. 7 times 7 is 49. Add another one for the 50th day, and that's how you get up to Pentecost.
The next holiday is called Shavuot, and that is mentioned in the Bible as coming exactly 7 weeks after Passover. And what is not specified in the Bible, although you can kind of work it out by the dates, is that it also coincides with the date of Revelation on Mount Sinai. So in Jewish tradition, it has become not only in the Bible, it talks about it as an agricultural holiday. It's whereas in the Passover, they talk also about the barley feast, the barley harvest, the festival of Shavuot, which is literally the Feast of Weeks, that celebrates the wheat harvest.
And of course, you had the third of the pilgrimage holidays, which was called Sukkot, the holiday of the tabernacles, which reminds us of the 40 years that we went in these huts, in these tents in the desert. Passover reminds us of when we were redeemed from bondage in Egypt, and Pentecost reminds us of the day that we received the Torah from God on Mount Sinai. Those are what those 3 holidays represent. And they were all followed by Jesus, no question about it. In fact, he probably celebrated most of them, most of his life, in and around the temple itself, because that's what you did when you had a temple. They pretty much had to leave their homes unlocked and come up to the temple 3 times a year and trust that not only no Jews would steal their homes, but none of the non-Jews would also steal anything from the homes. Very difficult law to follow, but that's what they did during those 3 times.
These are 3 pilgrimage holidays, and all 3 holidays during temple times, both first and second temple, Jews were supposed to come to Jerusalem, and they were supposed to participate in these special sacrifices that were being brought for the holidays. They were supposed to show their face. Deuteronomy, it says on these 3 holidays, every male has to show his face, and that's interesting. It's like God is there, God is in the temple, and they're supposed to come and show their face before God.
When you would come to Jerusalem and you were coming on pilgrimage, before you go up to the Temple Mount, if you were Jewish, you would immerse. And there were 2 large public immersion pools, one on the north side of the Temple Mount at the pools of Bethesda, and one on the south, a very large immersion pool at Siloam. We know this pool also from when Jesus is here in Jerusalem at the Feast of Tabernacles in John chapter 9. And he heals the man who was born blind, and that man goes down and washes his eyes off in the Pool of Siloam. So that has actually been excavated, and it was the main entrance for pilgrims coming into Jerusalem in the 1st century. They would immerse there, and then they would walk up a steep incline from the low point where the pool is at the bottom of the valley, and they would walk up a street going up to the Temple Mount. And on top of the Temple Mount, there were large structures. There was a royal stoa where the money changers were and where archives were kept. And beyond that, in the middle of the Temple Mount, was the temple itself, built of gleaming marble with gold gratings, gleaming in the sun, sparkling. And as you would get closer and closer, you could hear the Levites singing and making music as they were out on the steps, or perhaps priests praying. You could smell the smell of the sacrifices, which would of course smell like barbecue because of the roasting meat. You would have vendors all along the way who are selling fast food. So they would have their counters and you could pick up a falafel, you could get some hummus and grab a snack as you go up to the temple. There would be money changers who would take your foreign money and give you the kind of money that the temple tax was actually paid in, which was Tyrian half shekel or Tyrian shekels if there were two people, which are 99% pure silver. So that was why it was acceptable for the tax, because it was, you knew it was good silver and pure silver. You would, if you had come a long distance and you wanted to offer a sacrifice, you wouldn't necessarily bring an animal with you because that's very costly and difficult, and animals needed to be without any kind of flaw or any kind of blemish. But there were all kinds of merchants who had animals there that had been raised so that you could come from Alexandria, you could buy some pigeons or a lamb and you could take it in and you would have an animal that was without defect and make an offering at the temple. There would be a variety of languages happening at any given moment if you walked in during a pilgrimage. Groups of Jews and some visitors of Gentiles talking away. Just as today, we can hear somebody, one group speaking Spanish and another speaking Russian, and these people, of course, are speaking Hebrew, and those people are speaking Greek. Wherever you go in Jerusalem, it still fills up at the great feasts of Passover in particular. Shavuot, less so. Shavuot is more local people because it's just a 2-day celebration, and so not so many tourists come. But at the Feast of Tabernacles in the fall, another week-long feast, we call it Sukkot, preceded by the Day of Atonement and by Rosh Hashanah, the beginning of the year. That is another major, major focal point for pilgrimage and international tourists to come to Jerusalem even today.
So what you had was millions of Jews from all over the land. We're talking about Jesus' time over here. There were millions of Jews in the land of Israel. There were still many, many, many Jews living outside of the land of Israel from when they were exiled some 400 years before Jesus' time. But a tremendous majority of them decided not to come back to the land of Israel. So, but many of them decided during the time of the temple to make a pilgrimage to the land of Israel, to the temple. Very similar to many Jews who live in the diaspora today, and they come to Israel. Today it's a little easier for them because they come by plane and they stay in a nice hotel and then they leave when it's done. But that's the way it was back then. So really, I'm thinking about this now, the connection between the people of Israel who lived in the land of Israel and those who just came to visit is something that I'd never given much thought. But it certainly was something that impacted Jesus, I'm sure, as it did all of the children and adults of the land of Israel at that time.
Don't go away. When we come back, Richard and I arrive at the very steps that led to the first century Jewish temple, steps Jesus likely ascended many times.
First Century Foundations is committed to helping those in Israel who are most in need. And this is possible because of people like you. Your donations are supporting the most vulnerable in the land, especially aging Holocaust survivors. By providing them with food and medication and spending quality time with them, First Century Foundations with our partner ministries are making a real difference in the lives of people who have experienced so much suffering.
People like us who lost everything and live with the pain, to have people that help us a little bit, we're very grateful.
Call or write today and receive our bi-monthly newsletter, including the Israel Prayer Watch, to help you pray for all the ministries we support in Israel. Partner with us for just $30 a month or more, and your generous donations can make a difference in Israel today.
We arrived at the southern steps that once led up to the temple 2,000 years ago. One can only imagine just how thrilling it would have been to approach the magnificent Temple Mount that had just been expanded and refurbished by the mastermind builder, King Herod. Here, at the steps leading up to the temple, a pilgrim would have truly arrived and at last be ready to show their face before the one true God at his chosen dwelling place.
So what a fantastic day we've had.
Amazing.
Imagine 2,000 years ago, we're walking along some of the original steps that lead us up to those gates that are just behind us.
Okay.
And can you imagine, just for a moment, we're looking out to this colossal staircase. We can imagine thousands upon thousands of pilgrims 2,000 years ago coming up this ascent, the Ophel, up to the stairs that's going to lead them through gates.
All just thronging up together.
And the expectation and the preparedness.
Yeah.
And those men, women, and with offerings and sacrifices, going along a beautiful corridor, and up this latch to where they're at the temple.
Amazing.
And to worship God.
Yeah.
What an amazing journey. And what a privilege it is to be here today, to be standing on these very steps with
Absolutely.
pilgrims' journeys.
Absolutely. Well, Richard, thank you so much for bringing us here and helping us to understand the journey from the pool up the ascent here to the Temple Mount. This has just been an incredible, incredible day. And I want you to know something. If you've never been to Israel, if you're experiencing this today through the show for the very first time, you need to think about coming here. Every single tour that we do, we come and we stand on these very steps. These steps where throngs of people came from all over this area to visit the temple and worship the Lord on the high holy days during the pilgrim feasts. And not just throngs of people, but also somebody that you might know, a man named Jesus and his disciples who would also have walked in this very place.
That's it.
And so thank you for tuning in today. Make sure you check out our website, firstcenturyfoundations.com, where we have information about the next tour that's happening to Israel. We would love to have you join us. We're so thrilled that you joined us here on the show today. And we want to make sure that you come back the next time because there's lots more ahead on First Century Foundations.
Thank you for joining us today as we explored the Pool of Siloam and ascended Mount Zion to the temple, as we learned about the holidays Jesus celebrated. Please join us again next week as we continue our quest to get to know Jesus better right here in his homeland.